Excellent. Good morning, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to the Summer Undergraduate Research Program's Mentor Orientation. My name is Megan Shanahan. I work in the Office of Undergraduate Research, coordinating SPUR, our summer program for undergraduate research. And all of you are here today because you're mentoring one or more undergraduates this summer through a formal summer program. And I'd like to acknowledge each of our summer program partners, including Five for the Fight, Beckman Scholars Program, the Chemistry RU, GSRM, NARI, Pathmaker, Pathology, the Physics and Astronomy RU, ReachU2, Realm, Root, SPUR, and Pharmaceutics, which is quite a list, so it's exciting. This summer, collectively, we will support around 200 students, and I want to thank you all for being here and taking the time to mentor our undergraduate researchers. We would not be able to offer these types of programs without your continued support and high quality mentorship. I also want to thank our program coordinators who have done an outstanding job bringing these programs to campus and also honor their continued efforts in planning these meaningful experiences for our students. So this is a reminder that this meeting is being recorded and will be made available to all attendees soon. And we will start today by acknowledging that this land, which is named for the Ute tribe, is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. The University of Utah recognizes and respects the enduring relationship that exists between many Indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. We respect the sovereign relationship between tribes, states, and the federal government, and we affirm the University of Utah's commitment to a partnership with Native nations and urban Indian communities through research, education, and community outreach activities. So today we will briefly discuss the OUR and importance of undergraduate research and an OUR student mentor research collaboration agreement, which is a tool that we think might be helpful to mentors. Then we are very pleased to welcome our distinguished speaker, Dr. Ann Cook, to talk with us about mentoring from a pedagogical perspective. And after Dr. Cook is done, we'll break out into program groups so that individual programs can have their own orientations. If needed, hopefully your program coordinators told you if you need to stick around for that. And today's meeting will be facilitated by myself and Dr. Annie Isabel Fukushima. Dr. Fukushima, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Annie Isabel Fukushima. I'm the Associate Dean of Undergraduate Studies and the Director for the Office of Undergraduate Research. I'm also faculty in the School for Cultural and Social Transformation, but I'm wearing my administrator hat today. Super excited. I just want to express my gratitude to all of you for being mentors for undergraduate researchers in the summer. Many of our mentors work 9-month contracts, so we just appreciate it when you take your time to support our students year round. And so thank you all. I also would like to introduce you to the other members of the OUR team. You all probably may know them, but just in case, if this is your first time connecting with them, we want to make sure that our team members have a chance to introduce themselves to you. So I am going to punt it over to Eli to introduce himself.
Good morning, folks. My name is Eli Covarrubias, and I'm the Associate Director of the Office of Undergraduate Research. Thank you so much for being here today. Looking forward to today's orientation.
Fabulous. And I don't believe we're joined by our other members, but we are also, our team also comprises of Cindy Greaves, as well as Shelley Parker and Jude Ruelas. And we also have undergraduate research leaders who work for the office, Eliana and Ava. And actually, we just had another student we onboarded, Doi, and we will be growing our research team in the fall for undergraduate research leaders. So if you have students who want to work with the office that were Europe or SPUR mentees, we welcome them to apply for the opportunity. Just to say a little bit about the Office of Undergraduate Research, as many of you know, we sit under the Office of Undergraduate Studies. And our mission as part of undergraduate studies is to provide every student with an exceptional educational experience that empowers them to lead transformational lives wherever their educational and professional futures take them. The Office of Undergraduate Research also has our own mission, which is all about facilitating and promoting student and faculty collaborative research and creative works in all disciplines. So I want to thank you all for supporting our mission. just a little bit about some trends, just so if you're excited to learn more about what it's like to be part of these summer program activities. Last year, just to give you a sense, when we ran the Undergraduate Research Symposium, we found that our partners and students were participating from 80 different institutions from across the United States. When we look at our profile of students who are participating in undergraduate research in the summer, we actually see that we believe that we are breaking gender barriers. 67% of our students were female identifying. 32% were first gen, and look at that, with BIPOC students, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, we were doing really well there with 48%, so nearly half of our student participants identifying as BIPOC, with higher participation with the Hispanic and Latinidad communities at 24%. 29% of our students were Pell eligible, which is great. We're also addressing the financial inequities that our students are experiencing. Academic level, we know that they tend to be a little bit later in their academic journey at 23% juniors and 70% seniors. And so just wanted to share some of our trends with you all. And we will be sharing this out again next year at our next undergraduate research SPUR orientation. So just want to share that. Thanks, Megan. I'm going to punt it back to you. Is that correct?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. All right. And one thing we want to make sure you're aware of is the mentor-mentee agreement template. And I know that Dr. Cook will be also discussing agreement templates in her talk, but we wanted to mention them too, because we think they're really valuable. They can be a helpful tool that can help you and your mentee settle on expectations for the research experience. And it can also be something to refer back to when any tricky situations might come up. So it's something that can be modified as the experience progresses. So don't feel like just because you wrote something down at the beginning, you have to stick to it for the entire duration of the program. It can be a living document. We will send this out to you afterwards, so you'll be able to go through it and check it out. We also wanted to point out some other OUR resources available to you. We are always happy to provide letters of support for grant applications. So if you are in need of one of those, please contact Dr. Fukushima directly to start that process. Additionally, if you have funds and are interested in recruiting students to work on your research beyond the context of OUR funding programs, we do have a research opportunities database where you can post information about your project. And then we wanted to make sure you're aware of a lot of events that we host over the course of the summer that are available to your students. So we have the education series, which is a series of professional development events that complement the research experience. Those are varying dates. We'll provide links to, again, all of this when we send this out to you. We also have socials for the students so they can get to know each other. We'll host the Grad School Mini Expo on June 22nd, which is helpful for students in all stages of thinking about grad school, from I have no idea if I want to, or if it's for me, to I know which specific programs I'm applying to. And then the summer closes with the Summer Undergraduate Research Symposium on August 3rd. So we're looking forward to seeing your students there and having them share their research with the broader community. Lastly, your students are also welcome to submit to Range, which is our undergraduate research journal, which is searchable and indexable. And we've had a lot of use, so something that people can find. It's another great way for students to share their research. All right, it is now time to switch back over to Dr. Fukushima, who will introduce our distinguished speaker.
So I have the honor of introducing to you all, who many of you actually already know, Dr. Ann Cook, but just in case if this is your first time meeting her, Dr. Ann Cook is a professor of educational psychology and the director of the Martha Bradley Evans Center for Teaching Excellence. In her 20+ year career as a faculty member at the University of Utah, she has conducted research on cognition and reading comprehension. She is also the recipient of the 2020 to 22 University Professorship, through which she collaborated with the Office of Undergraduate Research to create a university-wide general education course for aspiring undergraduate mentees. Also coming from it, some video content. We're super excited. You'll be seeing that eventually. That's going to take a little bit longer. And the title of her talk today is Undergraduate Mentoring from a Pedagogical Perspective. So welcome to Dr. Ann Cook. We are honored that you are here.
Thank you. Uh-oh.
We can hear you.
Yeah.
I know I'm looking for my my PowerPoint here. So let me try that again here. There it is. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Annie and Megan. I'm really excited to talk to you about undergraduate mentoring from a pedagogical perspective. And I listed all my various points of experience here, not to overwhelm you or brag or anything about my titles, but to give you a sense of the different ways in which I've intersected with undergraduate mentees. As a professor, I've had a lot of students come through my lab, and so I've worked with a lot of undergraduate mentees and had a lot of really positive experiences and some really tricky experiences. As a university professor, I worked with the Office of Undergraduate Research to develop a course specifically designed to train undergraduate mentees. And in my current role as director of the Center for Teaching Excellence, I get to think a lot about teaching, and I believe mentoring is teaching in a broader perspective. And so thinking about how mentoring can fit into our pedagogical training. One of the reasons I am passionate about this area is I really like working with undergraduates. I love undergraduates in the same way that I love middle schoolers. And that's a weird analogy, I understand, but both of those groups come to the situation with a lot of excitement and a lot of naivete, and often, I'll admit, a different generational perspective. And sometimes that can be a point of contention, but I also find it really refreshing and really interesting because they look at things in a different way than I look at, and they ask a lot of questions in a different way than we might think about information. And it really helps me think about, well, how do I teach this? How do I teach them to do research in this field? So, like I just said, mentoring is teaching, and mentoring is about communication. It can be messy and it can be challenging, but it's ultimately about communication. And we're communicating not just what we know about a field, but we're communicating how we came to know what we know, and how we came to understand what we know, and how we come to ask questions, and how we think about our field. And sometimes all of this information, we've been doing it for such a long time that it's second nature to us, but it's a whole new way of thinking to undergraduate mentees, especially if they haven't had any experience in the research domain at all. And so when we're thinking about mentoring, or when I'm thinking about mentoring, I really like to think about mentoring as teaching, and it's about communicating or teaching what I do and how I do it and where I'm going to take it next. So if we're going to take this mentoring as teaching example, then I want to break it down into what's the first thing that you do when you teach a course. You talk about expectations, or you bring in your syllabus, right? And so, excuse me. And so I had asked Megan to drop in a couple of documents to the chat, and I don't have them all up on my screen, but one of those documents is a, I keep advancing when I don't mean to. One of those documents is a worksheet to prepare for the mentor-mentee relationship. And it's really helping you think about what are your expectations as a mentor for the experience. And so I know you're all in part of the summer program for undergraduate research. And so you have certain constraints on time, but in general, thinking beyond that, what kinds of time do you want to commit to mentoring a student? How many semesters, or how many years, or how many hours per week? what are your communication preferences? Some people prefer really formal communication in the land of internet and cell phones. Some people have loosened those restrictions and are comfortable with texting or calling. And communication also extends to, do you want to be called Dr. So-and-so? What pronouns do you prefer? And so I think communication and how to communicate with your mentees is really important, especially when we have such a large group of mentees who may not have experience within the research domain. And so calling you by your first name may be a really foreign experience to them. And so making that clear and what you're comfortable with and what they're comfortable with can go a long way in sort of easing or facilitating that relationship. I think it's also important to outline your expectations about resources. What resources can you provide in terms of equipment, in terms of time, in terms of space, things like that. And what resources are you expecting them to seek out on their own? Also is really critical in satisfaction within a mentoring relationship is, what outcomes are you expecting? Are you expecting a finished project at the end of this? Is a student just collecting data? Are they doing an honors thesis? Are they doing so what is the nature of the project that you have them working on? And what do you expect to be finished at the conclusion of this mentoring relationship? Especially when you're working in a lab situation, any rules and procedures are really important, especially if there's training involved. And so thinking about what's important in your lab. Are there specific things that you like done a specific way? Is the importance of data collection and storage really important? So those things are critical to outline what your expectations are, so you're not setting yourself up or setting the student up for any problems down the road. And then I think the other one that's really important to think about is credit for work. And how do you determine credit for engagement in the research? Is it authorship on a paper, authorship on a poster, acknowledgement? And so just outlining some of your expectations and getting your students to outline their expectations so you can come to an agreement, I think is really critical. And we'll talk about this in the context of that OUR mentor mentee collaboration agreement in a little bit. But I've provided this worksheet as a way for you to sort of think about, well, what are the questions you need to consider and you need to ask at the very beginning? Okay, so let's talk about communicating those expectations. And so when you communicate those expectations, you can communicate them, like I said, in the context of this collaboration agreement. Those expectations can be all those things that we just talked about, but it can also be, what are your expectations about what this mentoring relationship is really about? And what are your mentees' expectations about that relationship? Is it just this person is brand new to research and so you're giving them a broad orientation to the field? Or are you giving them a specific project that they'll be involved in beyond the scope of the summer program? Is it something that you expect to end with this summer program? Are you training them for future participation in an area? And I think you can also think about, how are you going to assess research participation? And then what resources are you going to provide in terms of professional development and networking for your mentees? And so these are some of the things to think about. And I'll walk you through what I think are some of the really practical, and sometimes they're so practical we overlook them. But I think sometimes they're some of the most important things to setting up a research relationship for success. The first is time. What time frame do you want to commit to mentoring? For undergraduates, we often commit to a semester at a time because their schedules are so fluid and they have so many degree requirements to commit to. The mentoring relationship may last longer than a single semester, but we often commit to a single semester at a time. And so when you're putting together that mentee-mentor collaboration agreement, you might do it one semester at a time, and so you can change it. As Megan and Annie referred to, it's a living document, and so it's something that you can change as you're going and as you're progressing through the relationship. I know this is a program about undergraduate mentoring, but you probably all also work with graduate students and maybe postdocs. With graduate students, I think they would all fall on the floor in dramatic fashion if we only agreed to mentor them for a semester at a time. We tend to do our agreements in terms of their degrees, and so, or at least in terms of projects. Or postdocs, because it's often based on funding, we tend to do our agreements in terms of years. And so thinking about the time frame for your mentoring relationship is really important, so students know what to expect and know how long to expect it. I think another issue that we tend not to think about as much at the beginning of the relationship is, how do we decide whether to continue or to discontinue? Sometimes a student walks into our office and wants to engage in research, and we say, great, let me, give you access to the lab and hook you up with my graduate research assistants, and we'll get you started on a project. And either the project ends, or your needs shift, or something happens in the lab, and maybe you decide to discontinue that mentoring relationship. How do you communicate that? And what is that based on? Or do you have certain standards that you want the undergraduate mentee to meet? And how do you communicate those standards with them? And so I think having both of you understand how to decide whether to continue or discontinue a relationship is really important. The next issue that I think is often tricky, especially for mentees on their end, is about communication. How do you prefer to communicate? Do you want email? Do you want text? Do you want phone? Do you want to communicate in person? Do you want to communicate via Zoom? How are you going to communicate? How are you going to meet? How often are you going to meet? Are you going to meet as individuals, just mentor mentee? Are you going to meet as a group, or a combination of those? When you meet, who sets the agenda? Is it up to the undergraduate student to decide, or to sort of organize what it is that you're going to talk about? Or is this something that you're guiding as you go? When you're an undergraduate first starting out in research, you don't even know what you don't know, and you don't know what questions to ask, and you don't know necessarily what's important to focus on. And so having them set the agenda from the very beginning can be really tricky. And so I think that's something that we have to recognize, that agenda is really important for driving the research relationship forward. But we need to recognize where that knowledge disparity is and where that experience disparity is, so that students can feel comfortable about where they're going with the research project. The other thing that I think is really tricky with undergraduates is your communication style formal or informal? Most of my graduate students call me by my first name. A lot of my undergraduate students call me by my first name. But there are some graduate students and undergraduate mentees who, no matter how often I tell them, feel free to call me Anne, they always call me Professor Cook or Dr. Cook, because that is what they're comfortable with. That's what they're used to in their culture, or from their own previous experiences, or that's what they're comfortable with. And so that's okay with me. But I think making sure that your communication style, whether formal or informal, is sort of agreed upon. If you don't want to be called by your first name and you want to be called by your title, make that clear so that students know what to expect. Resources is a really important issue, especially when you're dealing with students, whether undergraduate or graduate students. I think it's incredibly clear to make financial resources really black and white. Students need to know how much they're going to get paid, whether it's a stipend or whether it's an hourly basis, how many hours they're expected to work, how long this arrangement is in place, because they don't make a lot of money and they need to be able to plan out how that's going to work within their own lives. And so financial agreements are very, very important. Space agreements, it's something that we often don't think about because we may only meet with them in the lab or we may only meet with them in our office, and we don't think about like, where are they the rest of the time? And they may be staying in a dorm with a roommate, and so they don't have a lot of quiet space to work. And so thinking about what kind of space is needed to do the research, and do you need to provide that space for them? Or if you can't provide the space for them, give them a sense of the resources that they have access to, whether that's in different buildings on campus or the library or things like that, giving them a sense of the space that they have access to do the research. Equipment, it depends on what discipline you're in and what your actual project is about, what equipment becomes necessary for doing the research. But are you providing computers? Are you providing lab equipment, recording equipment, and so on? Or do you expect that to be provided by the student? Those are really important questions for you as a mentor to outline ahead of time. Another one that I think is important is, especially when it comes to satisfaction in the research relationship, is outlining those outcomes and expectations about outcomes. Sometimes before students can even get started in research, they may need specific certifications or trainings like IRB training or a city certification or safety training. And we have to take into account how long are those trainings going to take, and they have to count as part of the hours that we expect students to work as part of that mentoring relationship. We also need to think about what is the tangible outcome for any mentoring relationship. Like I said before, is it a thesis? Is it a paper presentation? Is it data collection? Is it just putting in the hours in a semester for a project that's ongoing? And so think about what it is that you expect that undergraduate student to achieve and make it clear to them. They may think when they come in and they're starting to collect data that they're going to be in this project till the very end and that they're going to be on papers or presentations or conference presentations. If that's not your expectation, I think you need to make that really clear to them from the very beginning so that there are no misunderstandings throughout the process. Another important issue that we often tend to ignore in mentoring relationships is how are we going to evaluate them? Whether there's a tangible outcome at the end or not, how will we evaluate them, and in what format is that going to take place? Is it going to be a casual conversation? Is it going to be written format? Is it going to be a grade? For example, if they were in an independent study or something like that. And how often can they expect this to take place? No mentee wants to be pulled into their mentor's office and be given an evaluation without expecting it. And so setting them up to expect or understand how that evaluation is going to take place and how often, I think is a really important thing. So they understand that this is not just something they do with their time, but this is something that they're going to be evaluated on and what the consequences of that evaluation can be. We talked about tangible outcomes, but intangible outcomes are also important. undergraduate and graduate mentees are trying to get into the field of research for a reason. And it may be that they just want exposure to a field. It may be that they want experience, or it may be that they're trying to network to get into graduate school or to get jobs down the road. And so thinking about what kinds of intangible outcomes you'll also provide. Are you going to take them to conferences? Are you going to introduce them to colleagues? Are they going to become part of your lab group? And so thinking about those intangible outcomes and how that's going to affect their overall experience can be really important. Also, they need experience in writing. Everyone needs experience in an improvement in writing. And so even if they're not on a thesis or they're not doing a paper or a presentation, giving them some training and feedback in writing can really further their development as research mentees. And so that's another important thing to communicate what your expectations are from the very beginning about that process. Another point that I think is really critical for everyone's happiness and safety are rules and procedures. Where can students learn about lab rules and procedures? Are they posted in the lab? Is there a lab handbook? Where can they get access to that? Is it something department lab based? Is it department based or college based or university based? Giving them specific information about where they can access that information is really important, especially during the summer when we may not always be around for students to call us. That second point is, who do students contact if there's a problem? Presumably you're their point of contact, but if they're working with other students or graduate students or technicians in the lab, who do they contact if there's a problem? And so what is that chain of communication? When and how often are students expected to attend meetings and presentations? I've been in mentoring situations where students wanted to work on a project in my lab, but then they were kind of surprised when I said, okay, you know, part of this is attending a lab meeting once a week on, Tuesday afternoons at 1:30. And they were like, oh, I don't have any time in my schedule to attend a lab meeting. And so making it really clear when and how often you expect students to attend things, whether they're meetings with you or general meetings, department colloquia, undergraduate, Office of Undergraduate Research presentations, making that clear about your expectations for attending those events. Something that I also think is really important for undergraduate students who are just getting started in the research process is helping them understand what the expected code of conduct is in research settings. We have to share resources. We have to share lab equipment. We have to share space. Sometimes we share authorship on papers. And so understanding the unwritten and written rules about sharing those resources is really important, whether that's scheduling time or scheduling space or sharing space. Understanding how those resources are distributed among everyone who's working on this project or in your research group is really important. It's also important as a mentor to reinforce rules about collegiality and respect. We all want to get along and we all want to work together. And I think it's important to set the tone that you want in your lab, whether, again, it's an informal or formal relationship. You want to make sure that everyone in your lab group feels safe and feels respected. And that way it sets everybody up for a positive relationship. It's your job as a mentor to make sure that that is a safe learning and research environment for everyone. And I think the stickiest expectation to communicate about is credit for work. how and when is credit for student involvement in a project decided? This is about who gets authorship and what the order of authorship is. This is a little bit different from field to field, because in some fields, the mentor may take last place, in some fields they may take first place, or order of authorship may be determined differently. And sometimes there are professional societies that present the norms for authorship in a given field, or it may be in order of contribution, whether that's theoretical and conceptual contribution, or the amount of time put in. And so making sure that you have a clear idea of how student involvement is going to get recognized in terms of authorship is a really important issue to have sort of in your mind before you get involved, because you may be a faculty member or on your way to being a faculty member, or you may be tenured or on your way to that, but students are not yet. And so these are rules that are unclear to them, and they're still working them out and still trying to understand them. And so making your expectations and the way that you make these decisions is really, really important. Also, if there are any restrictions on student communication about research, are there agreements that need to be signed based on the kind of data or the kind of information that they have access to? And so I think those are things that students really need to be aware of and made really crystal clear about what they can and cannot talk about or write about in relation to your research project. So those are some of the, I think, trickier issues about expectations that I think it's really important to outline in advance. And like I said, that worksheet about expectations can help you sort of, it's just a list of questions, but it's a list of questions that sometimes we don't think about when we enter a relationship. And it can help you outline, well, what's important to you to set up front, and what are you okay with leaving ambiguous? Once you've filled that out, it can help you develop your mentoring contract. So the OUR mentor-mentee agreement template is a really, really solid document that can help you, and it's what that worksheet is based on, but it can help you really outline what your expectations are. It's like your syllabus for a research relationship. And so it may look different from semester to semester with the same mentee. It may look different for individual students or individual mentors, and that's fine. But I think having that agreement set in place and having your expectations that are hard and fast set in place, and those that you're willing to be a little bit more fluid and flexible on also indicated, I think that's really important for students. So setting them up to understand what to expect in the research relationship. This mentoring contract, as Megan said, can also help you when you get into sticky situations. The OUR team is incredible at helping you navigate these situations, but having some of these agreements and expectations set up in advance may help you avoid some of those situations altogether. So those are some of the issues. So like I said, when you start teaching or mentoring, that syllabus or that agreement is the first thing that you set up with your students. But I wanted to, since I have you for this time, I wanted to talk about some of the other issues that I think are tricky, especially for undergraduate research students when they first get into learning.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. So the collaboration agreement and these, do you have any recommendations for like how much the student should be involved in deciding these things, especially given that they may not know what they need, or there's obviously a power dynamic in you saying, well, I want to do this. Like how do you help them push back against you if that's not what they want to do? Or how do you make this a mutual collaborative agreement when there's often such a disparity in experience and also in position?
That is a fantastic question. Thank you, Gail. So what I typically do is I draft a copy of an agreement. And then before anything ever gets signed, I talk to them about, this is how I usually set things up. And let's talk about, does this meet your expectations? And does this work for you? And some of those things may be hard and fast. Some of those things maybe how often you can meet, how you plan to evaluate the student, trainings they have to go to. Some of those things may be this is just what it is. But there may be other things that you're willing to be more fluid about. And those are the ones that I tend to have a conversation with students about. And, these are the things that have to happen as part of this agreement. But here are things let's talk about how many hours per week and which days of the week are you going to be in? Usually compensation is fairly well set, whether it's that can be financial compensation or course credit compensation. But modes and style of communication. And so, I think you have to figure out before you even show this document to them, what you're willing to be flexible on and what has to be a certain way. And I think even opening up some of this for a conversation about flexibility gives your mentees a little bit of ownership in the process. Does that help?
Yes, thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Thanks. That really was an important question. So now that we've talked about sort of expectations, I want to talk about some of the other things that I find to be the hardest things for undergraduate research mentees to grapple with. The first is imposter syndrome and communication. So we all experience imposter syndrome. It doesn't matter whether you're an undergraduate, a graduate student, on the tenure track, or a full professor. Everybody has imposter syndrome at some point, and in some facet of what they do in their own little research world. So how that manifests in undergraduates, especially, is they may be reluctant to ask questions because they don't want to look dumb. They don't want to look like they don't know what they're doing. They don't understand things. And so they may be reluctant to ask questions. They may be hesitant to speak up when they notice an error or when they have a contribution to a discussion. And so I think being aware of that as a mentor is really important, because if your students don't want to ask questions or they don't want to speak up in your classes, then you have to think about ways to sort of facilitate that or prompt that. And you can do that as a mentor, saying, hey, I know that you're just getting started, and so you probably have a lot of questions, and that's totally okay. And so I want to know what questions you have so we can make sure that you're really comfortable and you really understand what it is that we're doing so we can move on to the next step. Sometimes just acknowledging that everybody's got questions and you fully expect them to have questions is really important for them. They want to know that they're not expected to know everything. That's why they're in this learning environment in the first place. Students who have imposter syndrome or experiencing this in a research environment may have perfectionist tendencies. They want to make sure, they don't want you to know that they don't know what they're doing. And so they may be really dead set on making everything as perfect as possible, which may be really important if you're dealing with something with research that there's no room for error. Or it may be that you can say, hey, this is something that we're all learning how to do, and we expect you to take several tries before you get it right. And so I think acknowledging that for the students and helping them understand that I don't expect you to know everything, and I don't expect you to know how to do everything the first time. is really, really important in helping them feel relaxed and comfortable in the research environment. Another issue about imposter syndrome with respect to communication in the environment is an undergraduate especially may feel like they don't belong, especially if they're a new member of the lab and you already have a well-established lab group. They may feel like kind of an outsider and that they don't really belong as part of that group. And I think they may also worry about their status. If they're only there for the summer or they're only there for a semester, they may feel like, hey, I'm the low man on the totem pole. And so, you know, I don't really get a say in how things go, or it's not really up to me to question things. And so again, I think really being aware of that and helping sort of ease them into that situation by saying, you know, everybody's a part of this. Everyone's an equal partner in this research. And I really value your contributions and I really value your questions because it helps me understand what do I need to spend more time on. Just the way that we would do it in a class, we need to do it in the research environment. I also think it's really important to be aware that undergraduates may not be fully cognizant of some misunderstandings in the lab and some microaggressions that can occur in research environments. And so as the mentor, it's your job to set everyone up for success and to make sure that that's a safe environment, to make sure that when these things do happen, that you step in to make sure that everyone feels like you've got their back as their mentor. Related to that, these nuances in the research environment, whether they're about gender, race, ethnicity, religion, first-generation status, or other issues, I think it's worthwhile to help students understand how these can affect scientific roles and expectations in research and higher education, how they can manifest in publishing. Some fields may be really male-dominated. And what does that mean for women in that field? Some fields may be very, very white in general. What does it mean for individuals who don't fit within the boxes in a certain field? And in terms of their networking, in terms of their interactions, in terms of where and how they publish. I think those are really important learning opportunities for students in the lab, especially when we have such a large and diverse group of students involved in the summer program. I really like to point out issues of the importance of representation in research and representation in research roles, as well as in publishing and conference presentations. I want my students to be aware of, hey, like it looks like all the articles that we've read for this one topic were done by men, or all of the participant populations I do human subjects research. So all of the participant populations in this research seem to be predominantly white. I want students to be aware of those issues and to question those issues. I want them to be aware of how those issues manifest in communication and how they can contribute to misunderstandings and microaggressions, and how we can start to sort of recognize and address those misunderstandings and microaggressions. I really feel like students, if you put it out there that these differences do exist, and sometimes they result in issues in representation or communication or misunderstandings, and that it's okay to talk about this and it's important to talk about it in research, I think that can put a lot of students' minds at ease. Just the way that you would do it in the classroom, we do it in the research environment. The other issue that I've found really fascinating is students' complete lack of understanding about the peer review process. And this is something that's so important to us as researchers in higher education. Even at the undergraduate level, I think it's really important that students understand the process. If you're sending papers out for review or sending conference presentations out for review, let them see the reviews, let them see your responses. Students don't often quite get what that peer review process can look like and how you can respond to it. They may see a rejection and think it's over. You know, my career, sometimes we still see a rejection and think it's over, you know, I'm done. But letting them see how that process unfolds. I teach, and I'll get to this in a minute, but I teach an undergraduate research course, and we spend a lot of time talking about peer review and what that means for research in higher education and in academia. I also think it's important for undergraduates to understand the importance of replication and reproducibility. It may seem to them like a waste of their time to do replication studies, but it's actually incredibly important for the field to know that results are reliable and they're reproducible, so that when we build upon them in research programs, we know we're building on reliable and valid results. And so getting them to understand the importance of that in research is really important. And the one that students really struggle with, that's becoming more and more of a reality in our academic world, is open science and open access. Understanding what each of these mean and what the difference between them is something that I have found undergraduate students struggle with over and over. Open science, briefly, is this transparency in research and the willingness to provide more detailed information about your methodology and your data collection and your data, versus open access is where you publish information so that it's available without firewalls or without paywalls. And getting them to understand what each of these are, how they're different from one another, and their importance in the dissemination of research, I think is really important. So it's something that we can emphasize as we're talking about research results in the field. Another critical issue, and this is something that we're looking at in the Center for Teaching Excellence, is we talk a lot about how do we assess our students, but how do our students assess us? Currently, the main way in which students assess us as mentors, is through student course feedback. And this may be student course feedback in terms of the course they register for an honors thesis or independent study. This is really problematic because given the low number of students that we may have in these sections, there's a lack of anonymity and there's a lack of applicability of the feedback to those research experiences. So something that we're working on within CTE is developing a mentoring effectiveness framework where we're developing a feedback form for mentees to use that can be collapsed across mentees and individual research experiences. So no one mentee feels like they're going to be singled out in terms of their feedback for a given mentor. As you know, student feedback is only one piece of the puzzle in understanding the effectiveness of someone's teaching or mentoring. And so we also want to make sure that we're allowing mentors to reflect on their own process and reflect on what do they think is important in mentoring. It's like you develop a philosophy of teaching statement, you can also develop a philosophy of mentoring statement. Evidence of effective mentoring is important because this might differ from field to field, whether it's how many students go on to graduate school, how many students get awards, student publications, student presentations. What evidence do you have and are the expectations in your field of effective mentoring? And then finally, I think having peers reflect on your mentoring process is also important because they know what the norms are in your department and in your field. So this is something, like I said, that we're working on. We've just collected our first wave of data on, and so we're hoping to have more definitive information come out on this in the next year or so. I want to close by talking about some supplemental resources. The University of Utah Office of Research Education offers a research mentoring certificate and individual classes. If you're interested, this is open to either graduate students or faculty. If you're interested in learning more about mentoring, you can engage with their office. They offer both online and in-person options. I want to put a plug in for my course that I developed in conjunction with the Office of Undergraduate Research as part of my university professorship. The undergraduate research experience, I tried to design a course that I thought, what do I want my ideal undergraduate research assistant to know before they ever walk into my office? And so this course is for students from all disciplines at all stages of the research process, but I really geared it at students who have almost no research experience in higher education at all. And so it walks them through things like what are critical roles that people play in the research process, ethics, communication, reading, writing, and presenting in the discipline, finding resources for research, professional development, and how we situate ourselves as scientists in society. Over in the Center for Teaching Excellence, we offer several workshops, instructor resources, consultations, etc. While this is for teaching excellence, again, mentoring is teaching. So a lot of these, our resources will apply to your mentoring and teaching experiences. As you all know, the Office of Undergraduate Research provides a lot of support for faculty mentors on campus. And so their faculty resources for mentors page contains a lot of useful links. Some other useful links are CIMER, the Center for Improvement and Mentored Experiences in Research. They offer a lot of assessment and instructional information, as well as the Council for Undergraduate Research Mentoring Experiences. I just want to thank everybody for coming and for listening and considering what I've had to say. If you have any questions, you're free to reach out to me directly. My email address is there, and I look forward to talking with you all. How's that? I finished exactly at 11 o'clock. Are there any questions or comments? I don't know how much time we have for questions or comments, actually.
We could probably take 1 or 2 questions before we go into the breakouts.
Okay, Claudia asked a really good question about how often is the research class taught and how many credits is it? It's an online asynchronous class that fulfills gen ed credits. It's taught in the summer and spring semesters, and it's worth 3 credits. There's another question from chat. Are there any examples of rules and procedures lab documents we can find? That's a hard one because I think it really depends on your discipline. Mm-hmm. And so, rules and procedures in my lab where I do eye tracking with human subjects are going to look really different from rules and procedures in like a chemistry or a physics lab. And so I highly recommend that you talk with more senior colleagues in your department and ask them for their lab documents. Any other questions? If they're still stewing and you come up with one later, please do reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. That was great. Thank you. And we will be sharing those resources with you all afterwards. And we will definitely share Anne's email too. So if you think of some questions, you can always reach out to her. Thank you so much, Anne. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks. Bye, everybody. Good luck this summer.
Thanks. And really quickly, before we go into our program breakout rooms, there was one other OUR resource that I wanted to share with you that is the IRB lab. So it's something that came up because Anne had mentioned IRB, and so we wanted to make sure that you are aware of it. It's a monthly open workspace for students to come to receive peer mentoring and staff support when they're applying for IRB approval. It's led by one of our undergraduate research leaders, Ava, and we have some Wednesdays available in the summer for that, either Zoom drop-in or they can come to the library, and we'll send information about that as well.